Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Unit 6 lecture, which covers the topics of HTML and the web and its importance in the field of IT. And we can all agree that the internet has, dramatically transformed society in many different ways. And learning a little bit about how it operates is really helpful. This particular lecture or in PowerPoint and demonstration is really focused on the HTML technology, which is the fundamental language used to create web pages. This is in lieu of a regular lecture. We are not having class this week, so I'm recording this video. And I'm hoping that you find it helpful in completing your homework and learning about these technologies. So let's take a look first at one of the listing of the objective for the chapter. And this is chapter 4 from our textbook. And this is kind of the point of why we're here, to learn about HTML, how it interacts with the browser that you're working with, and how you can get simple content on the screen, and just understanding the basic anatomy of how it all works. And more importantly, I guess this helps you complete your homework. If you follow along, with the demonstration, chances are you'll be real close to finishing most of that work. All right, so let's kind of get into the materials here. So web pages, whenever we're on the internet, whatever web page that we see on the screen is created and generated by code that sits behind the page. So just to kind of demonstrate that a little bit, here I am bringing a browser window over, and I'm just going to launch, this is my simple personal little home page that I use. And I'm just going to right-click on an open area of the page, somewhere where there's not content, and choose this selection here. And what this shows us is the code that actually sits behind the page and creates the content that we see on the screen. And if you're brand new to this topic area, you're going to notice that some of this looks, like a foreign language, because basically it sort of is. It is a language unto itself called HTML, and there's a structure and a format for completing it. It does get intermingled a little bit with other technologies. For example, we have CSS styling elements here as part of this, and in some cases you link to JavaScript. You can see I actually have a little bit of JavaScript in here that I've disabled. But this is the basic anatomy of a page. And the interesting thing about the internet is that people who create the content for the web cannot obscure the code that creates the page from your eyes. Whatever shows up in their browser will be visible. The code will be visible to any user. So even if I open up my browser tab here and right-click and view page source and look at Google's page, you're going to notice that their code is visible too. Now they have some more sophisticated things going on here by virtue of some of these technologies, especially this little piece here. But the code cannot be obscured. Now there might be back-end code that's running that's creating this code that we don't get to see, but whatever generates the visible part of the web is always something that we can find and search and look at. And that's really pretty intriguing about this technology, where if you think about how regular applications work in an operating system, we never get to look into the source code for the applications or the operating system that we're using. We never get to see it. The web does not work that way. We do get to see at least what puts the things on the screen, and that includes the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So let's go back over to the PowerPoint now and talk about some of these concepts here. So web pages are typically stored on a server somewhere. So when you go to the web and you type in a web address or you do a search and you click on a link, you're being transported to some machine that's connected to the internet that is delivering the web content to you. So you're making a request for a document, basically, and that document is delivered. And then as your browser receives that information, it is then rendered according to the instructions within those documents. There are various browsers out there. So you see that, currently I was using Google Chrome, and a lot of you are familiar with Google Chrome, and that's the one we probably all of us probably use most often. But there's also Microsoft Edge, which I'm bringing up on screen right now. I don't use that personally very much, but I do test web pages in it. There's also Firefox, which is very popular. That's coming up, of course, on my other screen. And then I'm also a huge fan lately of using the Brave browser, which is a browser that's intended for privacy purposes and has automatic ad blocking, tracking blocking, and all these other features built in. And by the way, I recommend this product pretty heavily. I really like it a lot. There are other browsers, though. So for anybody who's an Apple user, for example, they're going to be familiar with the Safari browser, which is the primary browser on Apple platforms, both mobile and laptops and desktops. Regardless, though, browsers are required to follow sets of rules in order to create the content that we see. The rule set that they follow is based on a language called HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And that is the primary structuring language for web content. And really what it is, and I want you to notice, it's not a programming language per se, but it's a markup language, which means that we take traditional content that we might put in a document, for example, words, images, videos, etc., and then place special tags around the content in order to give it meaning and have it display in particular ways. The concept of hypertext, where does that come from? That really is based upon the thought that you can have links within a document that can transport you to somewhere else. Currently, HTML is in its 5th version, and the web technologies are always standardized. And so, in other words, we have standards bodies that oversee the language and basically set the rule set so that all the browser manufacturers and coders can follow that rule set in order to create web pages that look consistent from machine to machine, browser to browser, operating system to operating system. And fortunately, with version HTML5 and the way the browser manufacturers are operating now, things are pretty darn consistent, so you can be pretty confident typically that you're creating content and it looks good on all browser platforms. As I mentioned on the previous slide, the documents are formatted using what we call tags in HTML. And one of the first things that web students learn in our web program, for example, is how to structure basic documents. And the basic principles of it are really pretty simple. Once you get the pattern of it, it's pretty easy language to learn. So a lot of people are usually very enthused by learning these things because they kind of get a little peer into the mystery of how the web works. The interesting thing about the tags, though, is that they are structured in what we call angle brackets. So these would be the shift of your comma and period keys on your keyboard. So to the right of the letter M and usually to the left of the question mark key on most keyboards. Tags typically will come in pairs, so HTML has some rules to it. One of the rules is that all tags technically that are open should be closed, and what the tags do is they encapsulate the content. So like what you see here, for example, is a title tag with the word Fluency inside of it, and notice how the tag is structured. There's an opening bracket, a closing bracket, the tag type, and so there's different types of tags that perform different functions, have different meaning in the document, and then finally that tag is closed using the same name inside of brackets, but usually preceded by a forward slash. And so this is a typical pattern for most HTML tags. So just about every tag that you use, with the exception of a few, will have an opening and a closing version, and then your content goes inside. And whatever content is inside and what type of content it is indicated simply by the nature of the tag being used. So if this is a title tag, it tells you pretty clearly that Fluency must be the title of whatever thing we're working on. Now, depending on what kind of content you're putting on the page, each type of formatting will require its own tag. Most of us, when we learn this stuff, and I always tell my students this, is like, Ty, there's so many tags, how do I remember them all? And if you do some study on it, you can look up the list of all the tags, and there's probably like a couple hundred of them. And here's the thing: we don't remember them all. It's almost impossible to have all of them. And then on top of it all, they change things all the time. So functionally, what happens is you remember the things that are most useful for you on a day-to-day basis, or things you can, use constantly, basically. No, and they have the tip here. Uncommon tags can be looked up online, and you know what? I demonstrate that to my students all the time, because sometimes they'll type a tag in and go, you know what? That's not even right. I'm going to go look that up, and I show them, and they're like, wow, you didn't memorize that? And I'm like, how can I memorize it? There's so much to learn, and this is just one of the languages I know. So you should always be willing to look stuff up whenever you're doing any sort of coding. But it is true that programmers will remember the common ones just simply because they use them really often. So things like heading tags and paragraph tags and link tags, ones that we use all the time, image tags, for example. Some tags in documents are required, and what they're showing here is the most fundamental version of a web page. And the tags that you see here are absolutely required to make your page render correctly. And the document typically will be broken down into two major sections. But at the top of every document, it is required by rule that you indicate what version of HTML that you're operating. So for example, this is called the doc type declaration. It's something that extends from the parent language of HTML, which is XML, that just indicates which rule set or which doc type we're following. For HTML5, they simplified the doc type declaration, so it's just a simple exclamation, doc type, and then the keyword HTML. And that basically says this is HTML5. And my understanding is that with the draft versions of what is coming next, they're going to stick with that. So they're not going to be changing that, which is great. But what that in essence tells your browser is, hey, hello, I'm following rule set for HTML5. Please follow the same rule set so you can display my page correctly. Previous versions of HTML did have different rule sets, by the way. So we do see some variance in these doc types. So if you see doc types that are significantly more verbose, it's usually because they're older versions of the technology. When we get to the actual document itself, the main part of the document all has to fit in between the HTML tags. You notice how there's an opening and closing tag. So you start with the doc type, and then the whole document is encapsulated by the HTML tag. So everything has to sit, everything below the doc type has to sit inside the opening and closing tags. The document then is split into two major portions: the head section of the document and the body section of the document. And the head section of the document is kind of interesting because it contains what I call the non-visible parts of the page. These are not what the user sees, but they're usually special directives or instructions for various things. So for example, in the head section of the document, I would typically find links to JavaScript, or JavaScript actually embedded, or styling commands, or links to style sheets, and other special little tags and stuff that have, at least for the user, no special meaning that they're going to see up there, but for the programmers is important. Now typically the visible part of the page will happen in the body section. So all the stuff that we see within the browser window is controlled in the body section. Each one of those two sections has its own opening and closing. And so if you create an HTML document, this is always the basic structure that you start with. Now, I'm going to begin by actually demonstrating how some of this works, because they're going to be kind of stepping through this slideshow here, sort of in the same fashion that you'll need to complete your homework. So this might be a good guide for you if you follow along for getting that homework done. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is when you start to code HTML, there is some tendency, a lot of textbooks and instructors will start by saying, hey, if you're using Windows, just use Notepad, this version of Notepad. And I'm going to recommend that you absolutely do not. Oops, I lost my start menu there, but let's go back to that. I was just going to the start menu here in Windows and typing Notepad to bring this up. I do want to just reiterate, I do not prefer that you use this tool. If this is the only tool you have available, you can do the work with this, so that will work. However, there's some limitations to this product which make it not particularly ideal. If you happen to be working on a Macintosh, they also have a built-in text editor on that platform called Text Edit. However, it is a rich text editor by default, but once again, I don't recommend that as a good coding tool. Now, some of you have already had coding classes, so in some cases you are familiar with some of the coding tools. Like if you've had Python, for example, or you're currently learning databases. But what's really helpful is to have a tool that is kind of like a switchblade of coding possibilities. And so what I mean by that is to have one that can support many languages and be a better tool than what's built into your operating system. So to facilitate that, what I did is I created this list in our unit folder, both recommending some cool websites and also recommending some tools. So the one that I'm about to use to do the work today in Windows is called Notepad++, and I have a link here to the site where you can get the software. This is a Windows-only piece of software, by the way. There's a couple of other editors listed here that you can feel free to explore. The first three are completely free and don't require any registration or anything like that. WebStorm does require that you register as a student before you can download it for free. But any one of these products will work. I'm going to be demonstrating using Notepad++, because it's, at least in my opinion, is a straight text editor. That's always been my go-to tool for decades now, and I really like it a lot. It is very primitive looking, but it really is highly functional and powerful. And so I recommend that you do that. If you're going to go through the process of downloading it, you'll end up on their page. You can hit the download link and then just grab whatever the latest release is right from the top. There is an installation process that takes, a very short period of time, and is pretty easy to perform. If you do get stuck with any of that, just let me know. You can always revert back to just regular old Notepad or text edit if you need to. If you are on a Macintosh platform, you might want to look at one of these other two tools, either Brackets or Visual Studio Code. Those both are multi-platform free pieces of software. I did notice that this one here is going to be reaching end-of-life support, so Adobe is abandoning the project apparently, and they're now recommending on the website that you switch to Visual Studio Code. I personally like this product better than I like Visual Studio Code, but that's a preference thing. But for now, I would recommend just working with Notepad++. Now, I do have that installed here on my system, so I'm going to go ahead and launch that. And of course, it comes up on my other screen here, and you can see as I pull it over, right now I have some Java code in here. But I'm going to go ahead and create a new file in here just so we have a blank screen to start with. Often when you're creating web work, one of the first steps you really have to make is dealing with your files before you start to do any coding. And so I'm actually going to drop this down to our file system right now. And what I would recommend that you do, and I'm assuming that most of you sort of do this already, is create a folder for your work for this class. So I typically will do something like this. I usually put everything in my Google Drive. That's just my personal preference. But I usually create a folder for each class. So somewhere down here, there's a Fundamentals of IT folder. And then I'm going to create a folder for, I don't know, Unit 6 HTML. And that's where I'm going to put my work for this class. Now I'm going to go into that folder, and strangely, instead of creating the file here in Notepad++ and saving it to that folder, I'm going to do the reverse, and I'm going to show you why I'm doing that because it really helps to make sure that you're working with the file in a proper way. Okay, so one easy way to create a file in Windows is just simply to right-click, then choose New, and then choose the file type you want to create. Now, you're going to notice web page is not listed here, right? But text document is, and that's what we want, is to create a text document. Not a rich text document, but a plain text document that has no formatting in it. Now, you'll notice that this pops up ready for me to type in the file name, and because I clicked that little notification there, it went away. But here it is back in highlight mode, so just waiting for me to type in a name of a file. But you notice that it has a file extension attached to it, provided that that visibility is turned on. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to lock in that name. It's not the name I'm going to keep, by the way. But I'm going to first tell you that you should go to your View menu inside of File Explorer. And if your ribbon bar is collapsed, there's this little arrow up here in the corner. You can see that I'm clicking that allows the ribbon bar to appear. But go to the View tab, and then you'll notice that there's a switch inside of File Explorer that allows you to turn on your file name extensions. By default, in both Windows and Mac environments, by the way, file extensions are obscured. So you don't see that part of the file name. And I always tell people that that is a critical setting for IT professionals. File extensions should always be on. For a lot of different reasons, but we know what those mean and we know how to use them. And here's a situation where we need to use this to really make sure we're doing the right thing. So once you have that file in there, or if you're in the process of creating it or just renaming it like I'm about to do that right click, rename. You see mine is way at the bottom here. And then make sure you're highlighting the entire name of the file and name the file index.html, all lowercase letters. It's critical that it's exact. Also make sure you don't add spaces at the end. Make sure there's no extraneous spaces, no capital letters, and it's index.html, all lowercase letters. It's critical. And that's like a rule basically for creating web page files, home page files, that is. But HTML files do require this extension, and I want you to watch this icon as I change it. Now the operating system's like, hey, do you know what you're doing? You're changing a file extension. And I do know what I'm doing, so I'm going to say yes. And then as I change it, notice that the icon changes from like the text document to pointing to the associated program, which is Google Chrome on my machine. So if I go ahead and double click this file now and open it, well, I have created my first web page. It's completely blank, but it is loading up in the browser. And interestingly, I can confirm that there's no code by doing a right click, view source, and noticing there's no code listed here. Now our job, now that we've created the file, is to actually create the code, and then we can come back here and look at the file and see what we've created. So we're going to begin with the fundamentals shown on that slide. And so I'm going to begin right here, and notice I'm not working on that file, am I? So I actually have to open that file, or here's an easier way to do it. Just drag and drop that file right into Notepad++, and it will open. Yes, it is blank, but notice that my tab now tells me that I'm working with that particular file. And more importantly, because it's already saved and has that file extension in there, Notepad++ and most coding tools will automatically color code your code as you're typing it, which helps you to see if there's mistakes. So here we go. I'll get started with the most basic of the entries here, which is the doc type, which is required for all HTML documents. And you can see that I'm just open bracket, closing bracket. There is an exclamation point here. That's the only tag in HTML that I can think of that requires that. So that must go in. Use the word doc type, all lowercase, no spaces, and then HTML, once again, all lowercase. That just tells the browser, once again, this is the language that we're using. Now I'm going to go on to the next line, and I want you to notice what happened with Notepad++. At least it validated that I did this correctly, and it shows the highlighted opening and closing brackets, by the way. I'm also going to get into this habit as I'm writing code to save often. So you see right now my tab is red. It means it's not saved. So I'm just going to hit that red button here to save it. And this is saying it's been modified by another program. Sure, go ahead. That's fine. Because I did have it in the browser, I guess. And it was doing that. And actually, Notepad++ has been doing this to me pretty often. You probably won't get that message. Let's create the next part of the document. And I usually like to proceed like this. Whatever tags I'm creating, I usually create the tag and then create the closing version of the tag immediately. So I don't forget, basically. If you forget to close your tags, it can break your web pages, by the way. But the fundamental document tag is really the HTML tag, and I want to just reiterate how we do that. Opening bracket, closing bracket, the tag inside, and then when we close it, we type the same tag, but we preface it with this / to show, hey, this is closing here. So everything that we're going to put in this document is going to be between these two HTML tags. All right. The top part of the document, and I'm going to press my tab key here to come in one indent. And this is not required, by the way, but I just do that because for me it's easier to see things if they're indented and where they belong. I'm going to create the opening and closing head tags, just as shown in the PowerPoint. And then I'm going to come down and create opening and closing body tags. And you can see how I'm kind of strategically leaving space here to put stuff inside. Now I'm going to go ahead and do a save again, just to make sure. All right, so now I see my document is saved. And the other neat thing about this is when you use a tool that's designed for coding, like Notepad++ is, whenever I find a tag on the page and I click on the opening tag, this closing tag will highlight. So that's one of the ways that you know that you're doing it correctly. So it sees the opening and the closing and highlights them in the document. Doc type, of course, doesn't have a closing tag. It's just a standalone tag, so that's one of those weird ones like that. But most every other tag has an opening and a closing. So this is completing what's on that first slide. So this is kind of our first step. But let's make it a little more exciting. Let's go ahead and put something on the screen, more importantly. And for right now, I'm not really worried about putting stuff inside of tags because we just want to see it. So I'm just going to type hello world, which is what you're supposed to do in every programming language the first time you use it, by the way. So I'm just going to do a save on this. And then I'm going to go back to the browser where the page is already loaded and then just hit the refresh button. Now you will see hello world appear. If you happen to have closed that tag, you can go back to your file folder and just relaunch the page. And then you can see it. And then if you right click and view source, now you will see the code you created. And isn't that cool? It comes to the browser exactly the way you typed it. The browser reads it, interprets it, and puts it on the screen, assuming that you followed the rule set and did things correctly. Now, getting hello world on the screen's pretty darn exciting, but there's more to do. So let's move on to the next slide. So we've kind of covered what's here. On the next slide, we're looking at adding some special tags to the head section of the document, which are required by the HTML5 standard. So the HTML5 standard does require that we add this meta tag. And what this simply is a special directive that indicates what character encoding we're using to create the document. UTF-8 is the standard font format that operates most modern computing in the English language and most European languages and a bunch of other languages too, by the way. So it has like embedded into it like English, Spanish, German, Greek, Cyrillic, Russian. It might even have Hebrew and Arabic letters in there as well. But all the coding, by the way, and this is interesting, is all done in English anyhow. But formally we're supposed to declare that. And so you can actually, if you want, you can just copy this tag as it is and take it to your document. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to put it in the head section of the document. I'm going to indent in one level so that I can easily see that the meta tag sits inside these two tags. Now the meta tag has a weird thing going on with it because notice it's closing on its own. It's what we call a self-closing tag. And technically with the HTML5 standard you can omit that and it still works just fine. In some application development, people suggest that you include the / and it's better practice. And so we're just going to follow that practice for today. The next tag that's demonstrated is the title tag. And some people get a little confused by this because the title tag is something that the users do see, but it's not in the document. And that's kind of the fun part of this. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this. So I created an opening and a closing title tag, and I just put in there my first web page. So I'm going to save this work. You'll see the icon go from red to blue. Then I'm once again going to go back to that browser and refresh. And then what you'll notice, nothing changed on the page, right? Because we didn't change anything in the body, but we did change it in the head section. But if you look at your tab up top, it is now reflecting the title that we added. So the title tag in an HTML document this tag here controls what appears in the tab in the browser, and that's pretty important. So like when people have like 20 tabs open, it's important to get like kind of like the most important stuff listed first within the title tag, and not to be too verbose, because if you open a bunch of tags, it kind of all condenses down. All right, so that's the title tag in the head section of the document. So hopefully you got that part going. All right. Next, we move on to the body section, and we kind of already played with this. And as it says here, the main content of the website goes within those body tags. And now we're going to start adding stuff to that body section. So piece by piece, we're going to start building up the document. And you'll see like some of the stuff in this PowerPoint is reiterating what I've already said. So it says HTML source markup tells the browser how to produce the formatted page based on the meaning of the tags. HTML is written in a structured format to make it easier for people to understand. And I do agree. I think that generally speaking, HTML is probably one of the first easiest coding languages to learn, and it's not really a programming language, remember. And it also has a side benefit that like on day one of learning it, you can start putting stuff into a web browser, so you get really excited about it and seeing that, wow, this is pretty cool. I can put stuff and create my own sites, create my own web pages, and how cool is that? All right. Notice this last little bullet here, that markup is frequently used to clarify the tag's meanings, and that's kind of a move in HTML5. So when we're putting stuff on the page, you know, for example, the title tag indicates that it's a title, right? So it's important. That has meaning to the browser. So what's the title of this page? Oh, Serena Williams. Okay, that's the title. You know, so it's different than saying, hey, here's some info. What kind of info is it? Well, this is the title. It tells you right with the tag. So the tag has meaning, and that's pretty important. Once again, they're kind of covering this concept of open and closing tags. I think we did that pretty quickly. And now let's go on to this little section here where we are going to add a paragraph to the body section of the page, and then we'll experiment very quickly with bold and italics formatting, which is pretty easy to do. So let's go back to our document in our text editor, and let's get some content in here. So the first thing that we're going to do is let's put some words other than hello world there, and we'll begin by just creating a paragraph, and we'll do that using the P tag, which is for paragraph, and I'm going to close that tag immediately. I'm going to create a little space in between those, and then I can start typing some words. But you know what? Frankly, I'm pretty darn lazy with typing stuff here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go out to the web, and I'm going to search for something I like to read about, like the Green Bay Packers, and I'm going to go to their Wikipedia page, and I'm just going to copy a paragraph of text. Yes, that's sort of plagiarizing, but this is for demonstration purposes only, folks, not for commercial gain. And I'm just taking that text because I just don't want to type it all in. But you notice that the paragraph tag encapsulates that content. And you know what? I noticed that there's more than one paragraph of text on that website, so why not have a couple of paragraphs on the page? So let me create another area here where I can paste some stuff into. So I'm just going to come back and grab, the second paragraph. Now I want you to notice as I copy this from Wikipedia, one thing that should strike you is, anything that's a link or however it's formatted is not coming in here. This is coming in as straight text. And because of that, we will have control of the formatting as opposed to pulling the formatting from Wikipedia. Once again, the icon is red, so I'm going to hit the Save button. And let's go back to the browser again and take a look at the refreshed content. All right, so here is the web page with the paragraphs put in. Once again, I'm going to right-click View Source so you can see it's reading my code for real. And this is what it looks like. Nothing particularly fancy, but all we've done is create a couple of paragraphs. So this helps to get the content on the page. The other tags that they're trying to demonstrate are the bold tags. So I might think that the Green Bay Packers name might be a good thing to make bold, and I just want you to see how I'm doing this. I'm using a tag that's basically the letter B, lowercase b. I'm wrapping it around the text that I want to be bold, which is Green Bay Packers. The opening tag and then the closing tag. Let's save that. Again, let's go back to the browser, and refresh, and then check out Green Bay Packers. There, it is now bold. We can also put in italics tags using the letter I, and I think Green Bay, Wisconsin would probably be a nice thing to make italic. So I'm just going to wrap the I or italic tag around Green Bay, Wisconsin. Once again, opening and closing tag, and which text I want to have that feature. I'm going to save my file again, back to my browser, and refresh. And now if I look, Green Bay, Wisconsin is now italic. So that was just a really basic demonstration of how to do that. Play with it a little bit. And you can also, yes, combine the tags so you can make it both bold and italic at the same time if you want. Feel free to experiment. There is another special type of tag called a pre-tag that we're going to look at. But typically in HTML, when I add white space in a document, so if I put like extra space between these paragraphs and then decide like right here I want to type in a bunch of spaces and save this, and then go back to my browser and refresh, you're going to notice there's no change in the document. It did read the change, right? So if you look at the source code, you can see that it read it. But because of the way HTML works, it does not render those spaces. So the white space in the code document is really more for our benefit than it is for the user. So we do that to make it easier for us to read the code, not to make the web page nicer for the user. If you are concerned about making it kind of exactly like what you're typing on the screen, there's a special tag that people use called pre, and what it means is pre-formatted text. So this spacing, you see I put a bunch of spaces in there. I won't say will work, I'll say should work. Just like that. So you see opening and closing pre-tag, this spacing should be maintained. And then you'll probably also notice a different effect as well. So let's go ahead and save this, go back to the browser and refresh, and you'll notice how that spacing is preserved here. And more importantly, because we're using the special tag called pre, it also indents it and changes our font from what we call a proportional font like Times Roman to a monospace font, the same type of fonts that we usually find in coding tools. Now this coding font is different than that one, but I assure you that this one is a monospace font. And what a monospace font is, by the way, folks, is that every letter takes up the same amount of space. In a proportional font, the letter I will take up less space than the letter M. In a monospace font, they take up the same amount of space. And you can compare this to that. So if you do want to do something like that, the pre-tag is a really easy one to throw in there to control that. Now, often documents will have headings, and they have a various level of headings provided for HTML. I always tell my students they provide 6 levels, but functionally as a web programmer, I pretty much only use 1 or 2, sometimes 3, but usually never beyond that. But I'll demonstrate both H1 and H2 here by adding some heading tags to my document. So at the very top of the body section, I'm going to indent in, and I'm just going to create this H1 and say Green Bay Packers, spelled correctly. And then I'm going to close that H1 tag. So this is a heading level 1. And I want you to be really clear that heading tags do not go in the head section of the document. Remember, this part's not visible. The body section and below is. So I'm going to have one H1 tag, and then I'm going to put an H2 tag below it. And here, I'm just going to say something silly like the frozen tundra. And then that will be an H2. Close that H2. Now let's save this work and then go back to the browser once again and take a look. And now we're going to do a refresh and watch how I've added 2 headings. So this is a heading level 1, and this is a heading level 2. You will notice that the font is bigger, bolder, and there's more space around these 2 heading items, which is defined by the predetermined styles for those tags, by the way. All right. So that's a really easy way to create headings in a document. Going back to the PowerPoint now, they do a little thing here about the proper order of the tags. And so it says here, it doesn't matter in which order you start the tags. The rule is to make sure the tags nest correctly and they should mirror each other. Now, I'm going to say that this is not true, by the way, and because I am a web person by profession, I'm going to say that's absolutely not true. It does. In some cases, it absolutely does matter which order. What they're trying to say is, for the level of work that we're demonstrating here, it doesn't matter. But the general rule of thumb is, if you're starting a tag inside of another tag, it has to close inside of that tag. So if I want to make this text bold and italic inside of a paragraph, my paragraph will contain everything. My bold tag, if it's opened inside the paragraph, has to close inside the paragraph, not over here, but inside. And then the italic tag, if that's inside the bold tag, that has to end inside the bold tag before that can end inside the paragraph. And so that's a process called nesting, by the way. So that, it's always considered important to properly nest your tags. And if you do not do that, your document can break and your web page can break, by the way. There are a couple of tags that are kind of like one-ofs, and two fun ones to use are the horizontal rule and the line break. And I do want to point out with these that these also have alternates. So you can actually do these. You can do an HR tag as just HR without the closing slash, and you can do the BR tag as just BR. Either one of these will work in HTML5, by the way. And in fact, I think the HTML5 standard actually prefers these. However, there is some application development where it becomes important to use the self-closing version of the tag. So these are self-closing tags. So there's not a second tag to close it. It's closing right inside the same tag. You can omit that, though. So let me just demonstrate the horizontal rule. So this is a nice spot to put one. So I'm just going to type HR, and this time I'm going to not use the closing slash, and then I'm going to do another one here where I do use the closing slash, just so you see that there's no functional difference between the two. I'm going to save this, and then once again back to the browser to refresh. And now you see those horizontal rules is what they call them. So it just basically puts a divider on the page, and it can look really nice. It's a nice way to give some layout and definition to your content. The other tag that they were demonstrating is the line break tag. So maybe, just maybe, you don't want this paragraph to kind of keep rolling just the way it is. Maybe you think that this line should move down to the next line and start there. So I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to find that spot in my code, which is right here, and I'm going to insert a line break tag. Notice I'm doing the one without the closing slash. Now I'm going to save this and once again refresh my document. So you see what happened. Now that line moved from here down to the next line. I could simulate also it being a paragraph by adding a second line break. So I could save that and then refresh again, and now you see it push down 2 lines. Just to prove also that the version with the closing slash also works just fine, I will demonstrate that one as well. So this one has the built-in closing tag, and I'm using 2 of them once again. Saving my work, and back to the browser to refresh. So that's a horizontal rule, and this is a line break. Now, even though it looks like these might be separate paragraphs now, functionally they're all still inside the same structure. They're all still inside of a paragraph, even though there's a blank line inserted. All right, the next thing that they're trying to point out here is that some HTML tags actually have what we call attributes built into them. And attributes are a way that we can augment a tag and give them different options or controls or whatever. But the attributes become really important in creating certain types of things in HTML. So the first time we actually saw this was in that meta tag that we used at the top, which declared our character set. And so the tag is actually meta. Character set is considered an attribute of the meta tag. So this gives you also the inclination that if there's one attribute for the meta tag, are there others? And the answer to that is yes, there are. but this is the one that is required in all HTML documents. Now, some of the tags that we're going to work with, most notably, are link tags when we get there. Those require an HTML attribute in order to make the links work. But typically, when you see a tag in a document, sometimes you'll see things, for example, that might be something like this. So we might have styling elements that are attached to a tag. And so I could say something like color, probably green is appropriate, I suppose, that you can add in. So this would be a very simple styling attribute, just to show you the effect of that. Now my text is green. It was very, very simple to do. In other cases, we will add attributes to certain things that will help us control things with JavaScript, for example, or with CSS. So we sometimes will add classes. We sometimes will add IDs. And I didn't mean to do that. And I'm coming up with nonsense names here, obviously. But these are what we call attributes. And so these are added to tags to give them special functionality to help control JavaScript and to help control styling, typically. Back over to that PowerPoint, moving on to the next thing. Now, they're kind of going down a different stream here, and I'm obviously farther ahead than what text editor you want to use, but they are pointing out the fact that all HTML content, all you really need to create it is a basic text editor. So in a pinch, you can actually use Notepad to do the work. I would prefer that you don't. Use a better tool, but you totally can do that. It is true all operating systems come with simple text editors. They are not all created equal, though, and in some cases are not often optimal for doing this kind of work. So the important thing here is that browsers want web pages written in ASCII characters only, and so you need to have a proper coding tool. Notepad++ is one of my favorites to do this kind of work. Like I said, I highly recommend it. All right. The other interesting thing is, the beauty of doing web stuff is, as you've been seeing, that, and they're pointing out here, is that you can check your work while you're doing it, right? So I made a couple little changes. I would save my page, I go back to the browser, hit the refresh button, and I see it right there. And that's really a fun way to work. And they're just showing you how you can do that. So you can find your file, on your file system. And yes, all you need is a text editor and a browser to really create web pages. And then if you're in your file window, you can double click that. It opens up in the browser. We already showed that. Or you can choose right click and choose what to open with first. And sometimes that's necessary. Like if you're in a file window and you're working with an HTML file, if I double click it, it's not going to go to my editor. It's going to go to the browser. In fact, let me just show you that it does, right? It opens up in the browser. But if I want to edit that file, often you have to right click and then choose open with and select your program. Now, since I have Notepad++ installed on my system and a bunch of other coding tools, I can open up directly with any one of those. Notepad++ is probably my default go-to depending on what level of work I'm working with, but sometimes I will choose much higher levels. On a professional level, if I was doing a real project, I'd probably be most often working with Adobe Dreamweaver, which in my mind is still the professional's tool of choice for doing HTML work, by the way. Unfortunately, it's not free, and buying into their product suite is actually pretty darn expensive and usually pretty cost prohibitive for most students. Although if you're interested in that, it's totally worth doing, by the way. All right, let's go back to that PowerPoint and see if I can get there. The next thing that we're going to learn how to do here, once again on a primitive level, is we are going to start to learn a little bit about style sheets. And the interesting thing about CSS, or cascading style sheets, is that you can take style sheets and directly place them inside of your HTML document, or what professionals usually prefer to do is to take those files and link them to the document so they control the CSS separately. We're just going to learn how to place style tags in the head section of our document, and then we're going to proceed by just coloring a couple things a certain way, so you can see the effect and the power that you have with CSS. Now, I will say that as I'm putting this together here, that CSS is technically its own language, and usually is somewhat a separate field of study, but when we teach it here at Gateway, we usually teach HTML and CSS in our first web programming course. If you're interested in that, that might be a great elective for you, by the way. But in the head section of the document, remember, the non-visible part of the page, I'm going to create a style tag, and then I'm going to close that style tag right away. Now, everything that will exist between these style tags will now be in the format of CSS. And so what they're demonstrating here is I can apply styles to any object on the page by just simply referring to the tag name in the style section. So I can say, if I want to style the body of the documents, if I want to say body, and then I follow it with a set of curly brackets, and I usually split those curly brackets like that and then indent. Now I can apply the styles I want to the page. So in the book they're doing this, and I'm going to follow the book's example. They're doing a background color, and they're calling it black, and you can actually name colors by their names if you know what their formal names are. And then we're also going to add a color tag, which I kind of demonstrated already, and we're going to say white. Now, interestingly, color, that refers to the font, and this obviously will refer to the background color. So let's save this and take a look at the effect. This will affect everything in the body tag. So watch the effect in the browser as I refresh. And it is pretty darn dramatic because I did change the background color to black. Then if I wouldn't have changed my font color to white, I would not even see the text, right? Because it would just disappear into the background. But here it is flipped, text is now white, background is now black. You notice that the style that I put directly on this paragraph is still sticking, and the reason for that is why we call these cascading style sheets, is whatever style is more specific will always take precedence. So since I placed the style directly on a tag, that will take precedence over the global aspect inside of the whole body. And if you take a look at the source code here, once again, even that information follows. So you're never losing it, and you can always see it. All right, moving on to the next slide. They start to describe how CSS works, so let's just read through this a little bit. Typically, it says whenever you're styling something, you use the name of the tag you want to control. You can also control it through class declarations and ID declarations, and actually they have some really fancy syntax for doing real high-level things in CSS. But everything that you do, you basically will have, and you can see it on the previous slide here, the name of the tag, curly brackets will follow, and then whatever goes inside here are the styles and the values for their styles. A good example would be, if I wanted to style a tag directly, for example, I could add inside of the tag the attribute, like I did, demonstrated on that paragraph. So that's entirely possible. It is considered better practice, though, ideally to put the style in the top part of the document, or even better practice to put it external to the document, by the way. Now, the fun part of working with HTML is the fact that we can link our web pages to other things on the web. We can link them to other pages that we have created, or we can link them to other people's websites, or what have you. And when I think of what is really the power of the web, to me, like, the thing that makes the killer technology is that ability to be able to link from resource to resource. And so links on web pages are called hyperlinks. And so they have basically two parts, as is indicated here. So it's the text that is linked. So which is the text that is getting the link? And that's called anchor text. And then the URL, or where we're taking you when you click on that link, and that's usually expressed as an attribute of the special type of tag called an anchor tag. So that anchor tag will begin with the letter A, and then inside of it, as an attribute, we'll add a href attribute, which will be the URL of wherever we're going, and it could be a local file or it can be an external resource. And then we close it, and then we provide the tag that will or the text that will be linked, and in this case you notice the anchor tag opens. We add the href, which stands for hypertext reference, by the way. And then inside of double quotes, the exact web address. So if it's an external web address, you have to include the HTTP or the HTTPS that goes with it. And then when we close the anchor tag, whatever sits in between there, this part here, that will be the part that will appear as a link. And so let's demonstrate that. That's pretty fun to do. So I'm going to come in here, and the first thing I want to do is, it would be kind of fun to link to the Green Bay Packers official webpage, right? So let's look that up. So I'm just going to Google the Packers, and then here's their official homepage, which is packers.com. And then now that I'm landed on the page, I'm just going to come up here in the address bar, click to highlight, and then right-click to copy, and now I have the web address in my buffer, basically, waiting to paste into my code. So here's what I'm going to do. I think that it might be kind of fun, and maybe I'll just do it down here, is I'm going to add another paragraph, and I'm going to close that paragraph right away. And then I'm going to split these paragraph tags apart a little bit, and then indent one level here and say link to the Green Bay Packers official website. Okay, and here's kind of the weird thing. What part of this do I want to be the link? Well, it could be the whole phrase. It could be just maybe official website or Green Bay Packers. And I'm thinking the part that would look best is if official website was the link. That's my thinking. Now I'm going to put an anchor tag on here. So I start with the letter A, and then I'm going to add the attribute href equals double quotes. I'm going to hit paste. So there's the link. Close the double quotes, and I know this is coming off screen here, so let's move it over. And then I'm going to expand this just so you guys can see that this is all on one line here. I'm going to close that beginning part of the anchor tag, go to the end of what I want linked, and close that anchor tag. So now what's happening is official website is the text that will become the link and has the anchor tag wrapped around it. All right, let's go see what this looks like. This is pretty fun. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to the browser, to my page, not the Packers page, and do a refresh. And you can see my link is there. And yes, I've been to the site already, so it's already purple. A little hard to see on a black background, but you can see the link, and you can see how my pointer changes as I hover over it. You'll also notice down here in the corner, as I hover, it'll show you what address I'm about to go to, and if I click on it, it takes me there. So proof that it works. Very, very simple to do, by the way, folks, and pretty darn powerful at the same time. So this is one of the, I think, the things that made this whole technology go was this ability, is to link from document to document. Now, what's really cool is you can also add images to your pages, and I always enjoy doing this quite a bit. So here we are doing this like Packer thing. And you know what? Here's this like image right up at the top. Maybe we can copy this. In fact, I really like that logo. I'm just going to come up here and I'm going to right click and I'm going to save image as. And now it becomes really important that wherever you put this image should preferably be in the same folder with your other work. So go to the same folder where you're storing your web page, and I'm going to navigate to that spot right now. And let's see, did I pass it already? I sure did. And so here's the folder that has my web page. I don't see the web page because of the file format I have selected here. But I'm going to rename this file, and I'm just going to say Packers, maybe Packers logo, and then save it. Now I'm going to go take a look at this in the folder, and there's some strategy I'm using here. I see the image. And this is actually kind of a new image format for the web, by the way, but it's basically a JPEG file. And then I'm just going to right-click that logo, and I'm going to choose Rename. And then I'm going to make sure it's all highlighted. And this is kind of a trick I teach my web students, is I'm coming here to copy the exact name of the file so I don't mistype it in my code. And once it's all highlighted, I'm going to right-click copy, click off of it to lock the name in, and then I'm going to go back to my coding tool. And now I'm going to add just a really simple logo here, and this might not be the best spot for it. In fact, probably the best spot for it might be right up here at the top. And we're going to do this with the image tag that's demonstrated in the PowerPoint. So we're doing basically this little thing here. And this is the general format for an image tag. And the image tag requires actually several attributes usually to be used effectively. The first attribute is the source file, so the name of the exact file that we're using. And if it's in the same folder, all we have to do is list the file name. The other thing that's required by the HTML5 standard is that we add an alt tag, which is the description of the file. And that's something that will appear for people that either can't load the images, slow connections typically, or people that are hard of seeing, right? So some people actually surf the web with what we call screen readers, and the text is read to them. And when they get to an image, if they can't see it, well, it's not very useful. But if they had a description, so the description might say Green Bay Packer logo, or a photograph of dog jumping through the air, and then that will be read to the person on the screen reader. So that's why it's important to have that. It's considered a flaw if you don't include it, by the way. So let's go back to the coding engine here, and let's write a source tag. And so now all I have to do is paste in the name, because I copied it, right? I know there's no mistakes. And I'm also adding my alt tag to just say Green Bay Packers logo. Then I'm going to close the tag. Now, I know that the PowerPoint shows the self-closing tag in there, and once again, in HTML5, that is actually optional. So here's another tag that doesn't really require it, but I'm putting it in anyhow. All right, so now I'm going to save this work, and now we're going to go back to the browser, and hopefully we have a little bit of a wow factor, because now we've gone to the point of adding an image. So I'm going back to the page, and there is my logo, and wow, that is not what I expected to see, but that's actually kind of cool anyhow. It's absolutely huge. A little bit bigger than I anticipated, and for that reason I might actually truncate it a little bit in size, or maybe just go out and find a different logo is probably the smarter thing to do. Now, interestingly, with images you can actually control their size from the tag, so I'm going to just change the width of it kind of brute force here and set the width to, I don't know, 1500 pixels, just like that. I'm going to save this, reload it, and the point here is just for me to be able to fit it on the screen. So now you can see, well, it's a little bit better. It's still a little bit wide. All right, so I'm going to make that even smaller. Let's make that 1000 pixels and save it and refresh. And there you go. So now we have an image on the page as well. That wasn't really a great example. I was hoping for something. I was hoping to just get this part. I didn't realize the background came with it. But, not too bad anyhow. All right, so that's demonstrating how to add an image to a page. They go through this whole thing about talking about the different types of images that you see on web pages. And while that's important, if you were actually studying this topic, I don't want to go too deep into this, but those are the three most typical file formats. The one that we added was a JFIF, which is a form of JPEG, by the way. It's a more modern form. It has some special attributes as part of it. Ultimately, they do talk about like an example here of how to put the images on. And notice how they did pretty much the same thing I did. They're controlling width and height here. Be careful when you're doing that, though, because you can cause non-proportional scaling of an image if you do too much with that. But you saw how I did it, and it seemed to work out okay. It is also possible to actually link the images to a website as well. And so what they're showing here is an anchor tag, right? So there's the regular anchor tag with its link. And then instead of there being text between the anchor tags, instead we have an image. And so I could take that image that I've already added here at the top, and I can add that same anchor tag I used before to that image. So when people click that thing, they would go directly to the Green Bay Packers website at the top. And so that's converting an image to a link. So you see the image just sits inside those anchor tags. Let's save this and see it in action. Back over to the browser, doing a refresh. Of course, you will see no real change on the page, but when I hover over the logo, watch my finger change to a pointer. Notice down here again the link appears, and then if I click anywhere on here, it will take me to that Green Bay Packers site. So that is a way that you can convert an image to a link. Moving on through this, there's a little bit of talk here about absolute and relative references to website. Absolute references are ones that include the exact web address, and so in other words, it will have the HTTP or HTTPS listed exactly there, including the exact spot that you're going to. So typically a web address, and if you look at the Packers one that we used, sometimes it's just as simple as the web address. Sometimes there's folder hierarchies that follow that last slash, and that's what they're trying to basically show you here, is that if I'm looking to an external website outside of the file system I'm using to create this, then I have to put in the fully qualified URL, the HTTP, the colon, the // the name of the machine. If there's any folders or file listings after it, that all has to be included. If you're working relatively or to the local file system, then the links start to change, and we start to call them, instead of absolute references, we start to call them relative references. So for example, when we dropped in the image, the reason that this worked, this is a relative reference to the image because it's in the same folder. If I was creating a second web page and put it in the same folder, and you know what, I can do that super fast. In fact, one way I can do that, here, I'll just make, I'll just Control A this, Control C it, create a new file, paste it all in. I don't really need all this stuff in there. Well, maybe the top part would be helpful. And then I'm just going to type in a paragraph here just so I know I'm on a different page. I'll just put in whatever. Or maybe I should do something more meaningful like go pack go. And then I'm going to go ahead and save this file as. It's not saved yet. And I'm going to put it in that same folder. So I am in the same folder, and I'm just going to call it, I don't know, page 2. Or maybe I can think of like, I don't know, go pack go. Something more clever. .html. Okay. So now if I'm on my main page and I want to link to my other page, I could throw in here, I'm going to do a line break first, another link. So I could just say, I'm just going to say go pack go, and wrap a link around it. So I'm going to do href again, and this time I'm going to link to that page, and remember what I called it. I called it something meaningful. gopackgo.html, and then the anchor tag. And this is considered relative linking because it's relative to this page in my file system. So now when I save this, I have a link to go pack go. Let's see it in the browser. Refreshing here. So there's the link. I'm clicking it, and now I'm going to my second page. I hadn't even looked at it yet, but there it is. So not too bad, right? Now I could create a link to go back. That would be smart. That's helpful actually. But that would be a relative link, and I want you to notice the difference. When I hover over it, it recognizes that it's on my file system. Even though I didn't include that whole file path that you see listed below there, it just includes the piece it needs, which is where is this link taking me relative to where I am. And if it's in your same file structure, you just call it by name. If it's in a subfolder, you call the folder and then the file. And that's pretty easy to do. So like real commonly, a lot of people will put their images in image folders and then call the file. So that would be like a typical way to proceed. And that's all relative linking, by the way. All right. And they go through that whole example. So here's an example once again from the author. Coffee HTML will work if that file is in the same folder as your homepage. If it was in a subfolder, then I would point to the folder and then the page, and then that would work. But they're both considered relative. And a lot of it has to do with how you organize things. So some people will create websites where they have so much content that it makes sense to put things into separate folders just to keep it all organized and straight. And then some people will take all their web pages and put them in one folder with all the images and all the stuff, and then that can get pretty messy. Big commercial websites can sometimes have tens of thousands of pages and images and God knows what. So when it gets really big, you kind of have to put stuff into folders. But oftentimes for very simple static websites, it's not even necessary. You can just kind of get by without that. But if I wanted, for example, to link from my index page, my home page, to the fun page, I would have to say LOLcat /fun to get to it because of the folder. And then if I was on the index page and I wanted to get to tabby, that I would say LOLcat /friend/tabby.html. And that's all relative. And then if I want to get back up to the index page, well, that's a whole separate thing. But that's what they're trying to demonstrate here, is you have to go through the hierarchy in order to be able to get there. If you need to go back up the hierarchy, then the directive for pointing up the folder structure is to go .. /, which is the same as like hitting like the back arrow in your file explorer to go to the previous folder. And so if I need to go up one folder level, I use one .. If I need to go up multiples, then I have to have a .. for each folder level I have to go up before I find it. And sometimes that's necessary. I'm not sure why they include this in like an intro HTML thing like this. It's pretty complicated, actually. If you're new to this, because you won't be working at this level. But it's good to know. But that's all considered formats of relative file linking.